Nobody gets the goods like you, Joe.
Well, anybody can get the goods. The hard part's getting away. You plan a good enough getaway, you could steal Ebbets Field.
Ebbets Field's gone.
What'd I tell you?
Welcome to Money Unplugged. I'm Chris Hill. Thanks for being here. What's going on? What are you doing right now? Are you out for a walk? Are you doing stuff around the home? On a drive somewhere? Drop me a note, would you? info@moneyunpluggedpod.com. I always like hearing what you're up to when you're listening. Today on the show, Dr. Tobin Anthony. He is the CEO of Space Systems Integration, an aerospace engineering consulting company. He's a rocket scientist. He worked for NASA for more than a decade. He's an actual rocket scientist. And we had a great chat about some early lessons about money that he got from his parents, going to grad school and basically being broke in the process and how you deal with that. We even talked a little bit about the business of space travel. So let's get into it with Dr. Tobin Anthony. Do you have early memories of money?
Yeah. So my parents were first generation Americans. They're all four of my grandparents came from Italy. So they grew up in New York City. And it was, they were Depression era kids. And like a lot of your guests, we were aware of money, but we didn't talk about it. We were comfortable, certainly not affluent. Our parents stretched the dollar. Sometimes we'd be in the kitchen and we'd be having dinner and we're running low on ketchup. Well, my mom would take the bottle, go over to the sink and fill the bottle with water, give it a shake, and guess what? We had more ketchup. She just didn't see any problem with that, not even batting an eye. My sisters still tell me about the time that I showed up at a community pool wearing one of their swimsuit bottoms, and it was just, my mother didn't feel like it was necessary to shop, and I didn't think anything of it.
Probably just as well there weren't smartphones back then.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, glad.
No photographic evidence of that.
Absolutely. That would have been tough. We had what we needed, but we were learned to not need a lot back then. My dad, like I said, worked pretty hard. He sent all my siblings and I to school, and we were free of debt, no student debt. And the thing that's interesting, Chris, is that they were children of immigrants, and I think they existed on the bottom rung. That's where they lived. So I think my parents, as adults, looked at themselves and kind of compared themselves to their parents and said, boy, we've done pretty well. We have a nice house, we have this and that, and we're middle class. We're not struggling. So I think that kind of aspirational hard work ethic is something they worked really hard to convey to us. What was your first job when you were a kid? And how old were you? I was 16, and I was working at McDonald's just a few miles away from where I live now. And wore one of those funny, paper hats, which was great. That was the time for the funny paper hats. Yes, and my friends would come in, and that was a topic of conversation. I made minimum wage, and I remember when I got my first raise, which I think was like 1 nickel per hour increase. And, it sounds ridiculous, but that was the first time I kind of put together the idea of some kind of, change in compensation with performance. And I was like, wow, great job. It was very important in the sense that I learned that I put my most valuable asset into the market, which was my time. And I honestly had very little else to offer society back then. No, but this is something that's come up a couple of times. You get a job like that when you're a teenager, and one of the things you learn is the importance of showing up on time. Yes. Yeah. It was a job that I'm glad I'm still not doing. But other than that, it was a great experience, great learning. So your family moves around, you settle in Virginia. You go to the University of Virginia? Yes. Degree, do I have this right? Degree in aerospace engineering? Yes, sir. How old were you when you knew this is what I want to study? 6. 6? 6 years old. What happened when you were 6? Apollo 11. My dad worked in the aerospace industry up in New York. And when I was a kid, probably about 6 or 7, he showed me like the lunar module. Which was the spacecraft that in Apollo, that's the part that landed on the moon. I was just obsessed with space after that. I followed all the other Apollo missions. And I was just, it was something astronomy, anything to do with space, I was really big into. And then in the mid-'80s, there was kind of an upturn in the industry, and I had 4 engineering job offers and ended up taking one from NASA, which, believe it or not, was my lowest paying job. but there was just a mystique about that agency, and there still is. I still have friends from that time that I've kept in touch with for all these years, and just an amazing place to start your career.
I do not have a mind for science at all. And I do know that when it comes to medicine, there are people who go to college planning to become a doctor. Then they take organic chemistry, and that appears to be the class
and they hit the brakes.
that weeds out for
Yes.
a whole bunch of prospective doctors. They say, well, this isn't for me. Is there an equivalent when it comes to aerospace engineering, or is that one of those endeavors that people going in, 100% of the people who start out as aerospace engineering majors end up with that as a degree?
I only have a small sample size, but I actually started my first year in engineering school. I started out as a computer scientist because, this was in the early 80s. I kind of like computers, but then there's something romantic about going to space. And even though I had a lot of like Air Force ROTC people in my class, we had a fair number of women in my class, there was this sense of romance that even if you were doing, airplanes, or we had a lot of jet jockeys, aspiring jet jockeys, because that was, Right Stuff and Top Gun, that kind of thing. But there was some kind of feeling. So people were in it, and it was a pretty hard major, but people were in it because they were aspirational. They had some idea, there's some romance with space that I think kept them in the game. No, I didn't really see a weed out. I definitely saw a weed out programs in engineering, which was calculus. There are a lot of dashed hopes and dreams on the calculus classroom.
You referred to your pay scale at NASA. Does the amount of money you're being paid by NASA inform your decision to pursue an advanced degree in aerospace engineering? Does that make you think, well, maybe I need a master's and a PhD?
You know what? I can only speak for myself, but I felt like I just needed to learn more. And it wasn't like, hey, this will help me make money. I mean, nobody goes to work for the government with dreams of becoming rich. It's just not. You do it because it's cool. You do it because you're serving the country. But I felt like I was a little underwhelmed. And I looked at the people. I mean, I was underwhelming as an engineer. And I looked at the people who I respected, and they had advanced degrees. When I went and got a degree, I got a master's, and my wife and I left the DC area and went cross country. I only intended to get a master's and head back, but then I fell in love with what I was doing, and my PhD advisor convinced me to stick around.
Given your area of expertise, I'm going to ask you to speak for the entire industry. But what we do as human beings now with respect to space has changed since the 1980s, back when it was NASA and other countries had their version of NASA. And I'm just curious, does the fact that private companies can send people to space, does that change what we do in space? Because it seemed like, at least from where I was sitting growing up in the 70s and 80s, looking at NASA, I thought, well, we're doing it for exploration, we're doing it for science. Now, at least one of the reasons private industries are sending people to space is for tourism. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious where you think the money is in space exploration now.
Space exploration, I think, is always going to be driven, at least in this country, by NASA. I think that is something that's not a moneymaker. It's just something that is part of the human experience. The human dream is to go boldly where people have not gone before. I don't know that there's a market for it, but there are so many tools and features that we take for granted that are leveraged by space, not necessarily exploration. But the biggest obstacle is the cost of launch. Now, the cost of launch is down by 200 times. So 0.5% of what it was in the 1960s. And that's because of a guy named Elon Musk, who developed a rocket and kind of convinced other people to develop rockets. I mean, you hear a lot about SpaceX, but there are actually many companies that are delivering services, and they are bringing down the cost of launch. And when the launch costs are lower, you can do more things. You can put up GPS satellites. You can do Starlink. You can put up satellites that observe the environment and observe Earth. And things that were too expensive to do a couple of years ago are now becoming realistic, now becoming practical.
How big a percentage of the cost of, say, an Apollo 11 mission was the launch? It never occurred to me that when we see footage of the launch, which is very exciting, it never occurred to me, boy, this costs a lot of money. I just assumed the whole thing costs a lot of money. I never broke it down into, oh, this part right here, the launch, this really costs a lot of money, as opposed to, say, a safe landing.
A safe landing is very important. Obviously. Aerospace engineers work very hard to make that happen. The Apollo program was interesting because the country threw a lot of money. And for a long time, it was one of the most important things that we did as a country. And that didn't last forever. When you think about Apollo 11 landed in 1969, and the Apollo program was done in 1973. So it didn't last that long with just that kind of effort, and money wasn't sustainable. So yeah, when you look at Apollo, the Saturn V, one of the most powerful rockets that has ever been produced even to this day. And that's not going to be the case for much longer. But yeah, and it was the fact that it took so much to develop it, and it was human rated. So everything had to be, you had to have triple redundancy so that guys would come back. They get a safe landing. So that's very expensive. It's much, much, much more expensive to put humans in space than it is just unmanned spacecraft.
Let me bring it out of space and back to Earth in your personal life. You mentioned your wife. To what extent did the two of you talk about money before you got married?
So my wife and I had very different experiences in college. She worked hard to put herself through college. And so she had student loans and summer jobs. So I came from kind of a frugal background, but I had paying for books and expenses, but she was paying for everything herself, and that gave her a different perspective, and that's great. We were both on a budget, so we dated cheaply. We got married and went off to graduate school together, halfway across the country, and we basically bobbed and weaved around the poverty line for a couple semesters. They're just, it's a very sparse existence being a graduate student. So frugality again was forced upon us. We clipped coupons. We would go for, weekly 2-for-1 fajita nights at restaurants. But we hung out with other people who were in the same situation. And it was just, we just learned to live cheaply. We also learned it was possible to have a good life, at least at that stage of our lives, to lead a good existence without a lot of money. So we didn't talk a lot about it before we got married, but we talked a lot about it afterwards. Some of the lessons that we learned in grad school with frugality and really, just watching every dollar as it goes out is things that we still maintain even to this day. It's just never left us, so ingrained. I think it helped that we mixed our accounts. We had one checking account, one savings account. You pulled money out of an ATM, the other person knows about it. And, I think it helped. And then also it helped us because we both paid off her student debt. It was not something she had to handle. We handled it ourselves. And we learned to shoulder a lot of our financial burdens and concerns together. We learned a lot. She became a seasoned investor, and I learned how to balance a checkbook.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Life skills.
Absolutely. And if you both take an interest in money, you can support one another.
Yeah.
Literally and figuratively.
Yes.
How did having children change the way you think about money?
That was kind of a quantum change for me because one thing, my wife wanted to stop working after about a year. She came in thinking, I've got an advanced degree. I'm going to have it all. I'm going to have babies. I'm going to have school. I'm going to have work. I'm going to do all this stuff together. And she was, really charged. And that lasted about 12 months. And then she realized, I don't really want to do this much longer. I'd like to back off, or I'd like to stop. And we just weren't in a position for her to stop. And then all of a sudden it became more important for us to plan finances. It became more important that, hey, these kids, they're expensive, and we've got to put a lot of not just time, but planning into what we're going to do, how we're going to get them all to launch, how we're going to pay for college. So that took a kind of a restructuring where we went to like carefree grad students to being a little bit more serious about our financial planning.
What form did that take?
a lot of sitting down with spreadsheets and multiple spreadsheets laid out. And this is what we can do. And this is what we can afford. And this is what we need to do to start setting up college accounts for kids. And it was just a lot of discussions. And it was a lot of, it was good that we started from the same, basis, the same frame of reference, where it wasn't like one of us was like a spendthrift and the other. We were both, frugal to begin with, but we just had to be more calculated, more interested in planning for the future of our family.
So as an engineer, and we were talking about this before we started recording, you joked about how you're an engineer, you like to plan. When the kids get old enough, are there conversations where you're sitting them down one by one as they get to a certain age to explain money, or is there a different approach that you take with teaching them about money and how to handle it?
So this sounds kind of trite, but I use this phrase a lot, but I think values are mostly caught and not necessarily taught. So they would just they would see us standing, but trying to decide between a $1.79 bottle of soda or the store brand for like $1. And what would you do with that? And little things like that. So it wasn't so much talking about it, like sit down, hey, we need to have this conversation right now. And this is very serious. You need to listen to me. But it was just more, they could tell what we were doing, they could tell about the decisions we make. Maybe we're not going to do this right now. Maybe we're going to go do that. We're going to go to King's Dominion. Maybe we don't go to Disney World this year. And, we didn't really necessarily sit down and sit, but it was just a lot of kind of micro discussions over the years. I think as they got older, they would ask us for advice. And that's when we came, I think we talked about before the recording started, like unsolicited advice, really not always well received.
No.
So
not always.
No, they don't appreciate our brilliance as much as maybe we do. And our kids would then come to us and ask us questions. But, all three of our kids are launched and they're off the payroll for the most part. And they I think, are doing really well with the way they manage money and they see money and they use money. And I can't think of a time that we actually said anything that just changed, flipped the switch for them. But I think it was just the gradual environment that they were raised in.
No, but it is one of the little rewards of parenthood that nobody really talks about, maybe because it's little and it happens when your kids are older. Yeah. But when your kids are fully formed or closer to being fully formed adults, they're out in the world, they have their jobs. When they come back and they text or they call or you're seeing them face to face and they're asking you for some type of financial advice, there's nothing like it.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you actually want this advice? Yeah. This is fantastic.
Yeah, I like that. That's one of my favorite things about parenting adults. I think my possible favorite is having my kids tell me that I was right when they were younger. And that, I think, that trumps the financial discussions, the questions that come later.
Hey, I don't know if you've noticed, but we are now in the month of May. Time is flying, right? Memorial Day is just around the corner, and that is the official start of summer. So I have to ask, are you ready? Are you ready to go to the beach or your favorite lake or even a pool party? You know what I'm talking about, getting your body ready for summer. And you can do that by going to runpacers.com and getting the workout gear that you want. I just bought another new pair of New Balance shoes, but Pacers has got tons of brands for running, cross-training, and more. They've got Nike, Brooks, Hoka, Asics. They've got workout apparel for men and women, accessories, and you can get 10% off when you use the promo code MONEY at runpacers.com. It's that simple. Click the link in the show notes or go to runpacers.com, get the stuff you want, and get 10% off by using the promo code MONEY. All right, let's get back to the conversation. I have to ask you this question, and it's not really about money. It's about work, and specifically your work, because your actual job is used in conversation as an example of a person who is far more intelligent than the average person. I've done this in conversation where I've said to someone, hey, don't ask me, I'm not a rocket scientist. So here's my question. You're a rocket scientist. Is there a relatively straightforward or basic task around the house that you're legitimately bad at? Is there something where you're like, I'm a rocket scientist, but I can't handle this.
Making coffee. Which you're finding out right now.
This isn't bad coffee.
It is funny that my wife and I have, like everybody else, we have different things that I'm good at and different things that we're good at. I can help her with computers. I can help her with, things around the house. But if it's something to with like if it's something that requires like any kind of creativity, she's like, you know what? Don't hang that picture by yourself. Let me tell you how it's going to go. And by the way, you need to be wearing this shirt and not that shirt, And so I think it's the things that are a little bit more subjective. If there's a yes or a no or a 1 or a 0, man, I'm all over that. If there's a little bit of creativity, as an engineer, I've learned to be very decisive. So I'm thinking, I'm not going to burn that many cycles on this one task or this one thing. I'm going to do it looks good. And if I get out the door, great. And she's like, you realize you haven't buttoned your shirt all the way down. So so I would say it's the things that require a little more subjective thinking that are places that my wife excels far more than I do.
Well, let's go to the speed round. What is a thing you have bought that makes you happy?
The one thing that we bought is just a few weeks before the world shut down for the pandemic, my wife and I kind of on an impulse bought a house, second home. It's in the Blue Ridge Mountains, about 3 hours away from here. It's been a great place for relaxation, restoration. It's in a remote location, so things really move at mountain time. We bought it when our daughter, like within weeks of our daughter announcing that she was pregnant with our first grandchild. And we thought, hey, what a great idea. We could have a place where the family, we're all living in different places that we were at the time, that the family can get and meet and grow together. And it's just been that. For example, I'm just really looking forward one day when my granddaughter's old enough that I can teach them how to ski. We also believe that we're obliged to share our blessings with others. In addition to ourselves, we let our friends and family there use it. I've let several of my employees stay there. We wanted to be a blessing to, the people that we love. I do have a fun kind of financial story about it. We don't see it as a financial investment. We're not looking to sell it. We're not looking to fix it up. And
you're not looking to flip the house?
No flipping. No house flipping in the mountains. But I have a friend who has a second home not far from ours. And he sat down one day and calculated all his costs, like mortgage, utilities, taxes, repairs. And then he apportioned those costs and divided up by the number of times he actually visited the house. And it was like some ridiculous number, some ridiculous cost as in his mind per visit. And then he just sold the house. So I was like, so my wife and I have promised to never, ever, ever do those calculations the same way. We think there's a return on investment. Our ROI is purely emotional.
Yeah, there are times where doing the math does not help.
No.
It's actually a hindrance.
Yes, that is absolutely true.
Have you, like your friend, have you ever made a purchase that you regret and you still think about it?
So I recently received clearance to have this discussion out in the open. So yes, in fact, there is. About 20 years ago, my daughter was in middle school. And Chris, that's a tough time. Nobody's ever going around and saying, oh yeah, middle school. That was like the best years of my life.
Yeah, it was a blast. It was great. Middle school was great for everyone.
So great. Puberty, let me tell you, underrated. So, and to make things worse, she was in a new school and she didn't know a lot of people. So we said, hey, what a great idea. We could buy her a laptop that she could keep in her bedroom. And she makes a point that she's, paid for a little bit of that with babysitting money. But, we thought it would, A, help her with her studies, and B, keep her connected with the new friends she was making. And that laptop really only achieved one of those objectives. And that was the staying connected part. It caused a lot of tension and fights, one of which caused a very sudden and tragic end to the laptop. So she was very soon on the family desktop. But we had two takeaway lessons from that. One, we learned that throwing money at a problem doesn't often give you the best solution. And two, and this is true at all ages, not just teenagers, but sometimes it's not great to put people in positions where they haven't developed the maturity and self-discipline to accommodate some of the freedoms that they might get.
What is one thing about money that you wish you knew earlier?
It is okay to live below your means. We still have our inner graduate students. I think when we're adults, when we're young, we try to, shake off the shackles of youth. And we think that, we want to control our own lives. And I think when I was at that age, I thought, wow, if I, buy a lot of things, that's great. Then I'm really in control. And I just started ending up buying stuff that breaks and fades. And, it really wasn't until I joined the Motley Fool, which I've been a member for a long, long time, that it taught me the value of living below your means and the kind of control that you can get over your life to some degree. And there's a dignity and value to enforcing yourself a little bit of self-discipline.
It's also, I imagine, hard when you're in grad school because you're old enough that you have friends you went to college with who are out in the world. They're not in grad school. They're doing jobs. They're making actual salaries, and some of them are big salaries.
Yeah, it was hard. We were at the time where people were buying houses and we were like living in an apartment, and it was weird that we kind of had this feeling that life was passing us by. On the other hand, we were there with a lot of other graduate students who were going through the same stuff. So we had like a little micro tribe, and that helped a lot of it. And we came back into the world, and all of a sudden we were caught up with buying diapers and figuring out summer camps and things like that. And that's when real life intervenes. And sometimes, like I said, there's this cause for acquisition, and makes us feel like the more stuff we have, the more we kind of gotten ourselves into a life that seems familiar and comfortable to us.
What is the last thing you splurged on just for yourself?
So I fly a lot for my job. First off, my wife, like I said, grad students that are always living inside us, we don't really splurge on material things. We just don't. I think it's just too ingrained. But I fly a lot for my job. And as a consultant, I try to squeeze everything I can out of all my trips. And that sometimes leads me to be on plane flights that are at very inopportune and inconvenient times. So I will on occasion splurge for an upgraded seat. Because I tell you, if you're going to fly across the country in the middle of the night, it's best to do that horizontally as much as possible.
Yeah. What is a charitable cause that you like to support?
So we give a lot to our church, and that's great. I don't want to get in trouble with my parish priest who's going to leave nasty notes on your website about this episode.
Wow, I really hope a parish priest is not going to be sending nasty notes or leaving a bad review on Apple or Spotify.
If he does, he'll do it anonymously. No, he's a great guy. But sometimes we want our money to go to a little bit more of a targeted need. So for a long time, I've supported this organization, So Others Might Eat. It's SOME, S-O-M-E, it's actually down in D.C. It's a faith-based organization. And what's interesting about them is they look to meet both short-term and long-term needs for people. If someone's down on the luck, they can get a meal, a shower, a place to sleep. But they also, what makes SOME so valuable is they provide training, or they give people, help them develop skills so they can become productive members of society. They've been at it for a while, and they're quite good at it.
Do you have a favorite movie or TV series or fictional character that has money as a through line?
Yes, I do. And actually somebody took it on an earlier episode, and that was Succession.
That's all right.
And it's one of my all-time favorite TV shows. But so I'm going to come up with something new. And it is an oldie but goodie, but it's A Christmas Carol. And I know you asked about TV and movies, and it's a book, but it's had, I don't know how many different umpteen TV movie versions. There's like Disney, Scrooge McDuck, Muppets, Saved by the Bell. It's not a very subtle or complicated story. Jacob Marley spends his life hustling to build a fortune, and then spends eternity wrapped up in chains with a rag tied around his head. Scrooge undergoes this, crazy transformation, just a few hours of being shopped around London. So you have to be a little charitable with that. But, it had a lot of impact on me when I watched it as a cartoon when I was very young. Sure, it's a story about redemption, but it's also an insight to the human experience where love, family, and charity become overcome by ambition and lust for riches.
I've never seen it before, but I've had more than a couple of people tell me that the most compelling version of A Christmas Carol they've ever seen is the Muppet Christmas Carol. They're like, no, it's legitimately like put aside the fact that it's Muppets.
Like tears streaming down their faces.
Yes, it's that kind of transformative experience. Let me go back to Succession for a second, because you're right. Several people have mentioned Succession, and it wins all these awards, and I know all this. I've never watched it because they seem like the most horrible people. Like any show I watch, part of me is thinking,
you want to cheer for somebody.
Who am I rooting for here? And do I just need to watch that show with the mindset of you're not rooting for anyone?
Well, and that's what's very freeing about it, is that there's really no good person in the show. There's no character. There is nobody that is just somebody that you revere and admire. It's not that. They're all terrible people. And, so you don't have to waste your time figuring out who's the good one.
We will close with a penny for your thoughts. It doesn't have to be about money. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. It's just any bit of advice or wisdom that you've picked up along the way that you want to share with people who are listening.
Sure. And I know your listeners are very value-oriented, so I'd like to give them a twofer, if that's okay. And I promise
Absolutely.
It's quick. First one is be agile. One of my favorite stories is Apple CEO Tim Cook, when he was in business school. One of the things they had to do is upon leaving the school, they had to write what they thought the plan for their career was going to be. What's going to happen, what's going to happen at various points in time in their career. So he talked about how he did that, and he revisited it, and he realized that his planned life diverged from reality after about 18 months. He could not predict what was coming. I think about the many pivotal things that have happened in my personal life or my professional life. They happen without warning. I never could have seen them coming. I would say that people need to be open to ideas and opportunity to present themselves. You may not have time to ruminate and cogitate over them. Another one of my favorite quotes is Louis Pasteur: "Chance favors the prepared mind." So make sure you have conditioned your business, your professional, your academic, personal situation to take advantage of prospects as they present themselves. Number 2 is find your North Star. Develop a belief system that gives you guidance, strength, and an ethical frame of reference throughout your entire life, your entire career. Something that always has relevance to you at various stages of your life, and something that will never disappoint you. For me, that's my faith, my religious faith that sustains and guides me. It's been that way my whole life. As I've changed and matured, it's always been something to fall back on, and it allows me to just be a better person, serve people better. But whatever you choose, it absolutely has to be unshakable.
There you go. If you want to learn more about what Dr. Anthony and his colleagues at SSI do, that's easy. Just go to ssi.space. I'm Chris Hill. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week.